And all the information that's coming out of AI nowadays has to be validated by human beings.
What would you identify as the largest challenges that companies face when preparing their submission with AI?
So now AI can really monitor those published literature citations and the evidence within them to identify relevant studies and update systematic literature reviews and network meta-analysis in real time.
You have to know how to prompt the tool to make sure that what you get is what you want.
And what's really exciting is how AI is moving beyond devices into drug development and evidence generation.
And it would be really interesting to revisit this in the coming months and see what has happened to date and where new challenges have arisen. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Today we have with us Louise Perrault.
Hi, everyone. I'm Louise Perrault, the founder and CEO of IMEC.
And joining us today is Dr. Lesley Shane. Lesley, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Lesley Shane, and I work in health economics and outcomes research and real-world evidence with experience in biopharma, academia, and consulting.
Perfect. And today we're going to talk about the use of AI in evidence generation. Lesley, so the FDA has approved over 950 AI-enabled medical devices very recently, and they just issued a comprehensive draft guidance for AI-enabled medical devices with public comment that has recently been sent in. So it feels like a really pivotal moment. Do you want to start off our conversation about the use of AI in healthcare evidence generation?
Thank you, Nicole. And yes, sure. We are certainly seeing an unprecedented momentum at the moment. And what's really exciting is how AI is moving beyond devices into drug development and evidence generation. Both the FDA's draft guidance in January titled Considerations for the Use of Artificial Intelligence in Support of Regulatory Decision-Making for Drug and Biological Products, and as well as global organizations such as ISPOR, they have guidance as well around AI, and this signals that regulatory and health technology assessment authorities are serious about establishing frameworks for AI credibility.
Perfect. Well, I mean, that's what we want to talk about today. So why don't we explore how AI is being used across some of the critical phases, say, for example, pre-launch evidence generation, market launch support, and post-launch real-world evidence?
Sure. So we'll start with the pre-launch. And the biggest change, game changer right now is that AI-powered evidence synthesis from peer-reviewed literature and systematic literature reviews are being utilized by a lot of users in both pharma and also by agencies. A recent study published this year by Naylor and colleagues in the Clinical and Translational Sciences shows that AI is revolutionizing how we process clinical evidence. Natural language processing algorithms can use large databases and data sets of publications to identify relevant studies using tools like GPT-4 and automatically extracting key data points and even assessing study quality and the risk of bias with high accuracy.
Wow, so that's really interesting. And I think maybe why don't we break it down a little more so that people can understand exactly kind of what that means. So could you describe an example of how this would work in real life or in practice?
Sure. Thanks, Nicole. Sure. So instead of taking months to conduct systematic literature reviews manually, which we've done for years, AI can automate study identification, screening, and data extraction from thousands of peer review publications in weeks and now days. The Naylor paper that I described earlier shows that AI can generate attrition flow diagrams, identify literature gaps really rapidly, and even draft sections of manuscripts. For the regulatory submissions, companies can more quickly build comprehensive evidence from the published studies while maintaining scientific rigor. We're also seeing a shift from experimenting to operationalization. And according to a recent paper by Reason, and also this year, 2025, and his colleagues in pharmacoeconomics, Open large language models are no longer just conceptual tools. They're actively being integrated into real-world evidence HEOR workflows, from generating plain language summaries to drafting economic-like models with code. These large language models are already transforming evidence generation across the board.
Interesting. Well, we'll get into that a bit more later on, but what about regulatory acceptance? So are there kind of specific requirements that manufacturers might need to keep in mind when using AI for evidence synthesis?
Yes, as mentioned before, the new FDA final guidance is due to come out shortly, as comments were closed in April this year. Included with this, the FDA encourages sponsors and other interested parties to engage with the FDA very early on in the development process to help address the appropriateness of AI, and also for timely identification of challenges that may be associated with AI in the specific context of use, which is highly a security, government cloud designed environment to really help the FDA employees, from scientific reviewers to investigators, work more efficiently. This innovative tool is very modern, and it leverages AI capabilities to better serve the American public. ELSA in action will accelerate clinical trial protocol reviews and shorten the time to complete scientific evaluations. The time is reduced significantly to 6 minutes from what would normally be 2 to 3 days. Quite incredible.
That's really interesting. And I'm wondering, maybe we'll get into this a bit later, but seems like a major shift from the regulatory standpoint to be using AI in the generation of scientific reviews and developing clinical protocols. And I'm wondering, what the opinion is, or what the thoughts are on how to avoid some of the known pitfalls of AI, especially in terms of hallucinations or incorrect information, especially at the clinical protocol level. I mean, clearly humans will still have to be involved at each step, but I'm wondering if the FDA has addressed that in their announcement.
I would say, in general, there are a lot of challenges that are facing the evidence generation space. And we have to remember that the key is that AI should enhance, not replace, established scientific reviews and scientific practices. One of the biggest challenges, frankly, is ensuring that AI doesn't introduce study bias into study selection or extraction criteria. And as I was mentioning the Naylor paper before, it highlights that while AI excels at progressing large volumes of published literature, human oversight remains paramount and crucial for validation and conflict resolution. And sponsor companies who are submitting to the FDA and to health technology assessments have to be very careful about the black box algorithms. These stakeholders want transparency in how the AI makes decisions about which studies to include or exclude from the evidence synthesis.
Interesting. Can you give a bit more of a description to what black box algorithm would mean?
Lack of clarity. It's almost like when we were thinking back in the day of HEOR, garbage in equals garbage out for models. It's really along the same line. Understanding what was chosen for the selection of the algorithms to review and process, and that was really, and the end result is going to be a reflection of what's put in it. So always keeping that in mind is quite paramount.
This actually loops back to another podcast that we produced, where we talked about how to prompt the AI tools, which is one of the most important part. You have to know how to prompt the tool to make sure that what you get is what you want. And another thing that we also highlighted in this podcast was that all the information that's coming out of AI nowadays has to be validated by human beings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's clearly still an important part, even though, Lesley, as you're mentioning, these tools are very, very powerful and can save a lot of initial time. But of course, still, we're at the level where they need to be, every step needs to be monitored. And as you mentioned, needs to be transparent.
Right. And this moves us forward into the concept of guidelines coming forward.
Right. And Lesley, you mentioned that there were guidelines coming out of FDA. Is there any other agencies that are coming out with guidelines?
Yes. In fact, already in the HTA space, NICE in the UK have published their use of AI evidence generation position statement last year in 2024. And that provides clear frameworks for evaluating evidence in the AI generated space. And also the European Medicines Agency has also drafted guidance on AI use in medicinal products life cycles. ISPOR has also published the Palisades checklist for machine learning methods in HEOR, and this is essential reading for anyone using AI in the evidence generation space. The key message from all of these sources is that AI should augment traditional systematic literature reviews and not replace them entirely, as you both have alluded to, especially as you're saying before, having that human oversight.
So in terms of what we've discussed so far in the early stages of a product life cycle where you're preparing to launch, what are your predictions for where this is heading, where we might see AI going?
Well, we're already seeing every day AI enabling more sophisticated tools and more sophisticated comparative effectiveness research through different approaches, even like network meta-analysis, are being discussed out in the landscape. For example, the one paper nailer that I was describing before suggests that AI can improve how we integrate effect estimates from publications that have of randomized controlled trials with real-world observational data. This creates a more robust, complete evidence package that accounts for the individual patient characteristics and better controls for bias. So I expect that as we're going through, and we're already halfway through 2025, this will be a year where we're going to be seeing volumes of more AI-generated evidence generation beyond standard practice.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it will be really interesting to track that and perhaps come back to this in a few months from now and see where we are. So let's move on now to market launch support. So how is AI supporting companies that are navigating kind of that critical period between regulatory approval and securing reimbursement or payer coverage, especially when it comes to synthesizing published evidence?
Mm-hmm. This indeed is where we're seeing where AI is really proving its value in the discipline of health economics and outcomes research. Health technology assessment bodies and payers are demanding more sophisticated comparative effectiveness evidence from the published literature. They're asking for the value for money. AI is now transforming how the companies conduct the systematic literature reviews and the network meta-analysis to support the HTA submissions and the payer value dossiers.
So why don't we go through, maybe break it down again for people who might not be as familiar with these types of studies. Can you kind of walk us through how this might work, for example?
Yes. Okay. So let's take, for example, indirect treatment comparisons, where one type of medication is being compared to another type of medication, but it's not directly in the same comparative trial. Traditionally, conducting network meta-analysis from published randomized controlled trials took months of manual literature review, as I was referring to earlier. Now, as mentioned, AI can rapidly synthesize these relevant studies, extract the effect size estimates, and even construct the actual coding and the modeling for the treatment networks from the published evidence. And we're seeing that AI can automate much of this process while maintaining the scientific rigor. And this allows companies to build more comprehensive comparative effective cases and use cases for reviews much faster.
Interesting. And
So
another, oh, sorry, go ahead, Louise.
no, I was just gonna ask, I mean, everybody is very active into health economics modeling. So how is AI changing that landscape?
Well, the recent research that is being published right now indicates AI, including the GPT-4 that we all are using pretty much, can assist in really building those actual cost-effectiveness models and programming them. The researchers have demonstrated that the large language models can generate fully programmed health economic models when provided with a structured prompts, as we're talking how important prompts are, and really including information around the model assumptions and the parameter values that the humans provide. Most tests either show no errors or only minor errors, representing significant time savings. AI is also being integrated into software R packages to really help visualize how the model's functions work together, making debugging easier and modeling more robust. Another example is using AI to continuously update health economic network meta-analysis as new studies are published, ensuring that value dossiers are always reflecting the most current comparative effectiveness evidence. Another study by Reason has also shown evidence that large language models can be prompted, as I mentioned before, not just to write the code, but to do it with modular logic that really mimics the health economic model structures. They outlined that the LLMs, I'll call them for short, demonstrate that coding for statistical analysis and the economic network meta-analysis generated through the chain of thought prompts really guide the AI through each modeling step logically.
Okay, that's very interesting because as far as I know, payers will accept models in an Excel file. I don't know how many of them will accept models programmed in R. So now they have to go one step further and accept models that have been programmed in R through AI. So this is really a big step. So do you know if payers accept AI-generated evidence synthesis for coverage and for decision coverage?
Well, yes, and with caveats, I'll say it that way. What we're seeing is that payers want transparency in AI methodologies, especially for evidence synthesis. As mentioned before, the NICE folks have laid out a position statement, and that statement is clear that AI must maintain the same quality standards as manual reviews. And payers are particularly interested in AI applications in terms of uptaking. We're hearing that. And that can demonstrate they comprehensively captured all of the relevant published evidence and haven't introduced selection bias, ensuring that the AI does in fact do that. And those are, as I mentioned before, guidances that are coming forward. So that is the litmus test at the moment in terms of submissions that are coming from sponsors. And it is evolving very quickly.
Absolutely.
So given that, I think we've talked about a lot of really important applications at the market launch stage for AI. What would you identify as the largest challenges that companies face when preparing their submission with AI?
At the moment, the largest problem, it kind of relates back to somewhat what we were talking about with the black box problem. Many of the AI algorithms clearly lack transparency in how they make decisions about study selection or data extraction. And payers and HTA bodies want to understand exactly how the AI identifies and processes that evidence. And so as sponsors are preparing these submissions with AI, they have to invest in explainable AI approaches with the human lens and provide detailed documentation of their evidence synthesis methodologies. And there's also the challenge of validation and showing that AI-generated evidence synthesis produces the same conclusions as one would expect coming from a manual approach that's used traditionally. And as the paper by Reason that I was mentioning recently that came out pointed out, because large language models are probabilistic, the same input can produce different outputs. They recommend using temperature tuning and self-consistency methodologies to try and reduce the variability and improve reproducibility in high-stakes settings like HTA submissions.
That's interesting. Could you describe, for people who are not as familiar with the terminology, what temperature tuning and self-consistency methods might look like?
The temperature tuning and the self-consistency is something that it's like a setting of your of the model of the let's say ChatGPT or Gemini. Oh, yes. So you can actually put the setting, the temperature higher if you want to. I'm saying I don't know exactly what temperature means, but to say that you want it to be even more selective, but it takes more time to process. And the self-consistency is probably in the setting of the model itself. You can actually pick and choose the self-consistency level that you want. But all of this affects the speed of the model and the accuracy and all of that. So I think that's what that means. Just for your personal.
Yes, and I think also just the transparency of clarifying that up front, because already we know with GPT chat, we can go into the settings individually as users, and we can help sort of put the guardrails in a little bit more, and that's evolving more and more to ensure that that there's references, for example, that the citations, that the AI isn't going to overstep its boundaries with regards to making hallucinations or unfounded statements.
So that's really interesting, because it looks like what we're looking at here is not only prompt generation, but also important guardrails, as you mentioned, so that to ensure that what is output from the models is within the evidence that is being input, not anything added in. So those two obviously work together to ensure accuracy.
And we'll see more as these guidelines come to fruition, because right now they're quite loose. It's just basically saying transparency. So I think that this will evolve just like it has in the evolution of health economics and modeling and so on.
Right. So that being said, we will be looking for some examples of this in the upcoming months of these tools being used in evidence synthesis. So you mentioned, well, I guess this flows really well, but we were talking about guardrails, and you had mentioned the ISPOR Palisade checklist. Can you just describe a little more about that, like what resources companies should be looking to or should be using that are currently available in order to kind of correctly leverage for AI-driven evidence synthesis?
Yes, there's ISPOR is a fantastic resource. There's there's a working group that's been established and in the AI field, and they have developed the Palisades checklist, and it's quite essential. It provides good practices for machine learning methodologies in HEOR. And also taxonomy. So ISPOR has also defined all the terms around AI to really help get everyone on the same page. And that was also from one of the task forces that recently came out a few months ago. And then beyond that, UK's NICE position statement on AI evidence generation, as mentioned earlier, gives clear guidance on acceptable AI applications. And then finally, the European Medicines Agency reflection paper on AI use in the medicinal product life cycles is also very good foundational reading. And companies, and especially in the HEOR and market access area, are familiarizing themselves with AI-powered systematic review tools, and they are exploding at the moment, and basically are sort of grappling with and trying to understand how to validate their inputs against traditional methods. And if teams are working with sensitive data during launch, the recent paper that I was mentioning before outlines security models from local deployment of open source large language models to using secure, contractually restricted APIs with providers like AWS or Azure, you know, with these big platform foundations to remain compliant with GDPR and HIPAA. So this is really evolving, and these platforms are trying to pull together, you know, which basket of AI tools make sense and are selling them as kind of basically as user tools. It's been quite compelling as this is kind of formulating.
It's interesting to see, again, the rapid adoption of kind of AI processes by the FDA, because obviously a large part of regulatory submissions and drug development to the point where you're at market launch is highly confidential. So this is especially a place that I'd like to see more information on how that confidentiality will be maintained in the use of AI-powered tools. And it looks like this is kind of a stepping off point using restricted models and local models, local LLMs and restricted APIs, as you mentioned, not only to remain compliant with good data practices and HIPAA, but also for confidentiality, which we know is a large part of the process for manufacturers.
Indeed.
Now that we've talked about kind of pre-launch activities and use of AI at market launch, what about post-market? So what about looking at real-world evidence generation? And as you mentioned before, the integration of that with the clinical trial evidence.
Now, this is where AI really shines for continuous updating of evidence generation. The literature landscape has always been constantly evolving with new studies published regularly. So now AI can really monitor those published literature citations and the evidence within them to identify relevant studies and update systematic literature reviews and network meta-analysis in real time, which is fascinating. It's not static like it has been in the traditional way. And this supports ongoing formulary decisions for payers and really helps identify new evidence that might support indication label expansions or additional indications as well. The Naylor paper emphasizes as well that the AI enables this kind of dynamic, continuous evidence synthesis that wasn't feasible in the past with the manual methods.
And how, in practice, how does this work? I mean, what does this look like for maintaining payer relationships? How is this helpful?
Well, it's like a living HEOR document, if I can say it that way, where dynamic documents are produced and they update in real time, as I mentioned before, as the new evidence is coming to fruition. And this concept now can redefine how companies are maintaining the most relevant landscape for HTA and payer submissions over time. And this supports, as I mentioned, for formulary decisions and really helps identify emerging safety issues or efficacy signals from the literature as it's coming to fruition. And it also can really identify and refine the evidence gaps and basically guiding companies and sponsors on what additional studies might be needed to really sustain longitudinally their market access objectives.
This is quite interesting. It's something that we've come across quite often lately. Wouldn't you agree, Louise, in terms of kind of continuous updating and keeping current keeping evidence generation current throughout the process.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's been, I mean, there's so much evidence or literature, published literature out there that everybody who works in this field has a hard time to keep up. So, and there's also a trend towards shortening timelines for everything that we do. So AI definitely fulfill those two needs, is to summarize, find new information dynamically, summarize it, and shorten timelines, and get the answer to the question that you have faster. So definitely AI is going to change the way pharma and biotech do business, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And if I could just add to what Louise said, with respect to relationships of sponsors with the payer relationship management, these large language models can be, as I mentioned before, embedded into like a literature surveillance tool to auto-generate alerts and synthesis for payer relevant updates. And this is particularly useful when navigating managed access agreements that require continuous real-world evidence updates. And really, as well, flagging for things like safety, as mentioned before, and also patient subpopulation groups where the evidence makes a difference.
Absolutely.
So especially, as you mentioned, it in post-launch evidence synthesis, so in real-world evidence, and adding to the knowledge base that came out of the clinical trials itself. So, you know, how does this relate into, as you mentioned, those relate to kind of payer concerns, and I guess there's also opportunity to re-examine on an ongoing basis, perhaps like coverage restrictions on different formularies by using this ongoing evidence synthesis.
Yes, I agree. And as I said, it really is giving more of integrated outcomes feedback, if you will, because there's performance agreements, like outcomes-based performance agreements or value-based agreements, and it's going to be real time, and it's going to be relevant with regards to payer decision making as to whether they will continue to reimburse, you know, in terms of their conditional reimbursement approaches. And I think that it's going to change that landscape very dramatically.
And in terms of, are there any specific challenges that you can think of or want to discuss in relation to this kind of post-marketing evidence synthesis phase?
Yes. Yeah. We think it's bad for trying to keep up with the landscape and the literature. And it's also quite challenging for even AI to keep up with the updates in the literature. So ensuring that AI systems need regular updating and validation will be very important as well. And having that lens on the tools is going to be very important. And also really ensuring that AI doesn't miss any relevant published studies or introduce bias into the evidence selection. And so as we move forward, within the companies, to ensure that their AI evidence synthesis maintains that scientific integrity over time. And also, the AI systems have to be flexible enough to synthesize evidence for different audiences, because the payer's lens is very different than the regulatory lens and the healthcare practitioner lens in terms of clinical practice. So that flexibility is going to be very paramount in understanding which tools you're using for which audiences.
Interesting. Yeah, it's really, I think there's a lot of, you've brought up a lot of things in the different phases of a product launch that, you know, where there are some challenges, where there are some places for extended learning, and it would be really interesting to revisit this in the coming months and see what has happened to date and where new challenges have arisen. Especially with regard to some of the early guidance that has been put out, as you mentioned, these will be refined over time as these tools are used in practice more, and we learn more about the outcomes.
Indeed.
But in terms of like a key takeaway, what are some of the kind of key insights that you would pull from all of this to look forward in the future?
Sure. Well, first, AI excels at evidence synthesis from published literature, but it does require that rigorous validation and transparency, and that human oversight. It provides a clear roadmap for implementing AI in HEOR space. Secondly, AI should enhance, not replace, traditional systematic literature reviews and in terms of the actual process. I've touched on human oversight, but I want to emphasize that it really is important for and crucial for that validation and quality assurance, and the transparency for the decision makers who are trusting in that evidence coming from the sponsors. Thirdly, investing in really understanding the regulatory guidance from the FDA, from NICE, from ISPOR and EMA, and on AI use in evidence generation is really of paramount importance. As mentioned before, the quality and the credibility of the evidence synthesis really depends on the established scientific practices while leveraging the efficiency that AI can give us and gain for us.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So what, I guess, there's so much to think about here. What would you say is kind of most important for companies to keep in mind in preparing for kind of a expanded AI-powered evidence synthesis in the future?
Yes, Nicole. Well, just on the landscape alone, companies are building internal capabilities in the AI-powered HEOR world with regards to systematic reviews and evidence synthesis. And it's not just the HEOR world. Clearly, it's being done in early clinical development, market access, and post-launch, and also real-world evidence. And another key area is really foundational partnerships that can be established or are being established with AI technology providers who really understand the requirements in this world of evidence synthesis and regulatory. And most importantly, begin validating AI evidence synthesis approaches against the traditional manual methods now, because you will need this validation data and the approach for the regulatory and payer acceptance to be able to be foundational and grow. And as the Naylor paper has mentioned, it shows that moving towards AI-driven data linkages across the different evidence types is very relevant, because companies now need to really begin thinking about how to integrate the published evidence and with other data sources for the various diverse audiences that we have as stakeholders in the industry.
And so with that in mind, are there any kind of final thoughts on what you think is coming?
Well, we'll see market access really, in terms of market access decisions, primarily supported by AI synthesized evidence coming from these tools that are producing the published literature with more sophisticated HEOR models, meta-analyses, being entirely conducted with AI tools, and clear regulatory frameworks for the synthesis of AI evidence. And the Naylor paper suggests that AI will soon be real-time hypothesis generation sort of capability and treatment pathway construction with algorithms that's used from the published evidence. Companies that do master the AI-powered evidence synthesis now will have a more significant competitive advantage in building compelling value stories for their payer, stakeholder, and regulatory agencies.
That's a very, very valuable insight. So maybe what we could offer our listeners is, if they want to dive deeper, where can they go to read more about this? I know you've mentioned quite a few papers. So maybe we could just kind of list them here, and we can have them available as well.
Sure. Yeah, we can provide them at the end, a list of citations that have just come out in the literature that I've mentioned, like the Naylor and the Reason paper, for example, but also the guidances from NICE. I definitely recommend reading NICE's position statement for AI and the ISPOR PALISA checklist and their terminology breakdown, which is very helpful to get everyone on the same page around terminology. And finally, from a broader perspective, internationally, the European Medicine Agency's reflection paper on AI in medicinal products is also very foundational. And these resources together provide a good basis for implementing AI and evidence synthesis while maintaining regulatory credibility. And it will grow, but this is definitely a place to start.
Perfect.
That's great. Thank you.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Shane, for joining us today. We learned a lot on this in terms of where we're at currently and where the future might go in the very close future. We'll go with AI and evidence synthesis.
Thank you for having me. And it's been an exciting time working at the intersection of AI and healthcare evidence synthesis. And I'm excited to see where it goes.
Great. Well, we'll definitely have to have you back in a few months, and we'll look at where it has gone over the next second half of 2025. Perfect.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. We hope you found it valuable. And if you did, we'd love it if you subscribed, shared it with a colleague, or left us a quick review. We've got more expert insights coming your way, everything from rare disease access to real-world evidence and global pricing market strategy. So stay with us. And if there's a topic you'd like us to cover or a question you'd like answered on the podcast, please feel free to drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. From everyone at IMAC, thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you next time.